These are the Hobson brothers.
Right.
Dale and Cliff. I know him as Gene. Some people know him as Cliff. What have you. Both of these gentlemen were over in Germany about the time that liberation started to take place. And Gene, he was in the 45th Infantry Division that came up, and he'll talk about his experience on liberating Dachau, the concentration camp in Munich.
Veteran to tell his story is a little dangerous, but I'll try and make it as brief as possible. First of all, I want to make a disclaimer. I'm going to tell you about my wartime experiences, but what I went through as a veteran and through the European campaign was a walk in the park compared to some people like our mutual friend Bob Wilson, remember him, that was a veteran of the Bataan Death March, and people like that, and particularly our fellow veterans that have come along in later, more unpopular wars. Other than that, I could just tell you my story. I was born and raised down in Buell, Idaho, to a great family. Went to finished high school there, and about that time, the U.S. was supporting Great Britain in their efforts against the Nazis and so forth, and we could kind of foresee what was going to happen. So I went to work, elected to go to work in the defense industry, and right out of high school, or the next year after I got out of high school, I moved up to Seattle. Excuse me. Went to work for Boeing Aircraft. The girl that I'd been going with in high school moved over to Portland and went to work for Jansen Woolen Mills over there. And so we continued to see each other. I was working in, first of all, in Boeing's, and then I had a chance then to go to work as a lead man because of my experience in metal fabricating in the shipyard. And I think I was making about 80 cents an hour on the night shift at Boeing's, and I went to work in the shipyard for $1.75 on the day shift.
Wow.
And so then I made the best decision of my life. I married Nora, and we had become wealthy because of our big increase in wages. But we continued to live there in Seattle then until they changed my rating as far as my induction to 1A, and I knew that I was scheduled to go in. I went into service in August 1944 down in Fort Douglas, Utah at Salt Lake, and that was quite an experience in itself. We've heard a lot of objections about full scan inspection at the airport. That's nothing compared to what we went through down there. I remember lying awake there the first night in the induction camp, listening to the young fellows that had never been away from home, kind of crying in their sleep. And it was quite an experience. After that, we went on down to Camp Roberts, California for our basic training, which was pretty much routine. It was including bivouac, which we were, this bivouac, our finishing bivouac, came along the latter part of December. They called us in early because of the Battle of the Bulge that was going on, and let's see, I left one thing out. When I was in Fort Douglas, Utah, I presented the officer with a letter that I had from the commandant of the 9th Naval District in Seattle, asking that I be assigned to a Navy repair ship program because of my metalworking experience. Well, the captain looked at the letter and promptly filed it in the round file and said, unfortunately, what we need are people in a rifle company.
Targets.
So anyway, we finished our bivouac, or they called us in early off the bivouac in the winter of '94, sent us home for Christmas. We were home for Christmas in
44.
In 44, I'm sorry.
That's correct.
And then around the 2nd or 3rd of January of 45, they put us on a plane here at Gowan Field on a C-47 and flew us back to Fort Meade, Maryland. And then from Fort Meade, Maryland, they took us to Boston Harbor, where we got on the Queen Elizabeth for transport overseas. Excuse me. We were on the Queen Elizabeth for, I think 4 days, maybe 5 days, without any escort, because the ship was faster than the escorts, and they took a zigzag course across to try and avoid any U-boats or anything. But we made it safely to Glasgow, Scotland, is where we landed. They took us off the boat and put us on the regular train system that went from Glasgow, Scotland, down to Southampton in England, and then on a landing craft and across the channel over to Le Havre, France. So we were assigned to our division. We were there up in the mountains in eastern France for a period of maybe a couple of weeks. And then our regiment was went in further into the mountains up to the front and relieved another regiment that was up on what they call defense perimeter. It had actually been there for quite a while, and they had dugouts that had been, they'd dig a hole and then cover it with logs and dirt so that you could crawl into the hole and be comparatively safe. But if you can visualize the setup there, it's kind of interesting. Had a forest covered, this was in beautiful wooded countryside, had a wooded hill that we were on here, fairly steep, and then across a cleared valley, it was probably a half a mile across the valley, and then another wooded hillside where the Germans were dug in a defense perimeter. So about all that was going on was that every night we'd send out recon patrols to see what was going on over with them, and they were sending out patrols to come over into our area to see if they could get information for what they needed. I did have one story to tell there about we were in such deep woods that you really couldn't see very much, except that if you look up at the sky, the sky was lighter than the trees, and you could see that way. And one night, about 2 or 3 in the morning, it was my turn to stand on what we call stand on the gun. We stood in our foxhole and had the machine gun out in front of us, and it was very, very cold, so we would stand there in our sleeping bags, and I had mine unzipped down to about here, and as a gunner, I carried a .45 caliber pistol, and I just had it cradled in the zipper of my sleeping bag, standing there about 2 o'clock in the morning, kind of looking around, and I suddenly felt a presence. So I turned slightly to my left, and there, silhouetted against the sky, as this German soldier was on patrol. He had no idea that I was there. And I tried to call out, "Halt." Halt. Anyway, he took off on a dead run down through the trees. And somebody tried to take a shot, but I don't think he ever hit him. But that was my first experience as a combat soldier. And we were there for probably another 2 weeks. And about the only thing that went on were those night patrols. And then occasionally from the rear they would bring up hot food to us. Usually we had what we call either K or C rations. But once in a while these trucks would bring up hot food to us. But every time they did that, the Germans seemed to either smell the eggs or something, because they would throw in a few rounds of artillery. And so that was exciting. And then we were off to try to get into Germany. And my group didn't have to try and fight our way across the Rhine River. We were held in reserve. 2nd Battalion was held in reserve. And so we got to cross over on a pontoon bridge. And then we joined, after we got across the Rhine River, the 157th was assigned to General Patton's 3rd Army. And it was our job to follow the tanks. And as he would come to these small towns, he would just go the tanks around the towns and secure them. And then it was our job to go into the towns and clear them out from the German soldiers and so forth. We'd isolate them first. And this went on for 2 or 3 weeks. The little towns, I can't remember the names, it was all kind of a blur. But then we came to the town called Aschaffenburg, Germany. And some of you may remember, Aschaffenburg, Germany was a training area for Hitler's SS troops. And not only the soldiers that were there, but the civilians seemed to be very radical. And they would not give up the town, and so they were advised that if they didn't, that we were going to have to ring the town with artillery, and that the town would be leveled. But they elected not to surrender. They were a very radical group, and so they did ring the town with artillery, and bombarded the city with heavy artillery until it was practically leveled. But then we had to advance into the town, and there was a couple of times where I did have a couple of close calls that I can tell you about. As we were going into Aschaffenburg, we ended up in an abandoned hospital building, and we set up our gun on our machine gun up on the 2nd floor in a kind of in a corner room, looking out over what was left of the city. And if you can visualize it, there's a big open window here in front of us, and another open window on the side of us here. We're up on the 2nd floor, and of course there's no glass in the building. It's been bombed out. But there again, along probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a bunk kind of underneath this window on here, and my buddy, one of my squad members, was sleeping on this bunk, and I was on the machine gun. And a German patrol, unbeknownst to us, came by, and one of them fired a anti-tank bazooka grenade or whatever it was. It was highly explosive. They fired it in this window here, and it went up through the window. And fortunately for us, it had a plastered ceiling in it and a void between the ceiling and the next floor up. So the, the round